You're one empty supermarket shelf away from realizing something uncomfortable. Dish soap is not a guarantee. It's a luxury disguised as a necessity. And the moment supply chains hesitate, even for a few days, you start to notice how quickly grease, bacteria, and that faint, sour smell take over your kitchen like a slow, silent invasion. And here's the part nobody tells you. Most people don't actually understand what dish soap does. They just trust the bottle, trust the foam, trust the scent of lemon freshness, as if it's doing something magical. But what's really happening is brutally simple chemistry. Surfactants breaking the bond between oil and water, pulling fat molecules away so they can be rinsed off. And once you understand that, really understand it, you realize you've been outsourcing a basic survival skill your entire life. Listen, imagine the power goes out, trucks stop moving, stores empty in 48 hours, and suddenly you're standing over a sink full of greasy plates thinking, now what? Because water alone doesn't cut it. Oil repels it, clings to surfaces, becomes a breeding ground for bacteria. And this is where most people fail, not from starvation, but from slow, creeping contamination, stomach issues, infections, the kind of problems that don't look dramatic, but quietly destroy your ability to function. And this is where the first shift happens. You stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a survivor. Because long before industrial detergents, humans cleaned cookware just fine. And they did it with something you probably walk past every day without noticing. Ash. Wood ash is not dirt, it's chemistry in its rawest form, packed with potassium carbonate. And when you mix it with water, something interesting happens. You create a mild alkaline solution, primitive but effective, capable of breaking down fats through a process similar to saponification. The same core reaction used to make soap itself, and when you rub that gritty, gray paste onto a greasy surface, you're not just scrubbing, you're chemically dismantling the grease, turning it into something water can carry away, and yeah, it doesn't smell like citrus, it smells like survival. But it works, and it works reliably, even when everything else fails. Now here's where it gets smarter, because ash alone is good, but combining it with friction turns it into something far more powerful. And this is where sand enters the picture, one of the oldest cleaning tools in human history, used by soldiers, campers, and anyone who's ever had to clean a pan without modern supplies. Because grease isn't just a chemical problem, it's a physical one. It sticks, it coats, it resists, and sand provides abrasion, tiny sharp edges that physically scrape away residue, while the ash breaks it down chemically. And together, they form a system. Primitive, yes, but brutally effective, and more importantly, endlessly renewable, which is the real currency in any survival scenario. But here's the thing, nobody warns you about. Cleaning isn't just about removing visible grime, it's about controlling invisible threats, bacteria, biofilms, the microscopic world that thrives in leftover oils and food particles. And this is where heat becomes your silent ally, because boiling water isn't just for cooking. It's one of the most reliable sanitation tools you have, capable of denaturing proteins and killing most pathogens when used properly. And when you pour near boiling water over a surface you've already scrubbed with ash and sand, you're layering defenses, mechanical removal, chemical breakdown, thermal sterilization, and that combination is what keeps you safe when convenience disappears. Now let's push it further, because what happens when even firewood becomes scarce, when ash isn't as easy to come by, when you need something portable, something you can carry, and this is where fats themselves become the solution. Which sounds almost ironic, using grease to fight grease, but when you combine animal fat with an alkaline substance, even something as simple as leftover ash water, you can create a crude soap, not pretty, not perfumed, but functional. And this is not theory. This is the foundation of soap making that has existed for thousands of years. And once you understand it, you stop seeing waste, you start seeing resources. Leftover cooking fat becomes a tool, not trash, something that can be transformed into a cleaning agent when conditions demand it. And then there's the overlooked detail that separates people who cope from people who adapt. Water efficiency. Because in a disrupted environment, water isn't unlimited, and every rinse matters. So instead of running a tap endlessly like we've all been conditioned to do, you start thinking in stages. Scrape first, remove as much residue as possible before any liquid touches the surface. Then apply your cleaning agent, whether it's ash paste or sand, then rinse minimally. Maybe even reuse gray water for pre-cleaning less critical items. And suddenly, you're not just cleaning, you're managing a system, reducing waste, extending your resources, and this shift in thinking is what keeps you stable when others start to struggle. And here's where it all connects, where the idea of saving money quietly transforms into something deeper. Because yeah, not buying dish soap saves you a few bucks, but that's not the real story. The real story is independence. It's knowing that a basic function of daily life, keeping your tools, your cookware, your eating surfaces clean, does not depend on a factory, a truck, or a store shelf. It depends on your understanding of simple principles: abrasion, alkalinity, heat, and resourcefulness. And once that clicks, you start seeing everything differently. You start questioning how many other necessities are actually just conveniences waiting to fail. Because the truth is, collapse doesn't announce itself with explosions or alarms. It creeps in through small inconveniences that slowly stack up: empty shelves, delayed deliveries, rising costs. And the people who adapt aren't the ones with the most supplies. They're the ones who understand the systems behind those supplies, who can recreate them, simplify them, replace them, and something as ordinary as dish soap becomes a perfect example of that shift, from dependence to control, from passive consumption to active survival. And once you've cleaned a greasy pan with nothing but ash, sand, and a bit of heat, and watched it come out just as usable as before, there's a quiet realization that settles in. You were never as dependent as you thought, you were just never taught another way, and now you know. And once that realization settles in, it does something strange to your brain. You stop trusting convenience the same way because you've seen behind the curtain, and you start noticing how fragile these everyday systems really are. How something as simple as a plastic bottle filled with synthetic surfactants has convinced millions of people they'd be helpless without it, when in reality, the mechanism has always been sitting right in front of you, hidden in plain sight, disguised as dirt, waste, or leftovers. And this is where things take a darker turn, because understanding how to clean without dish soap isn't just about saving money anymore. It's about staying functional when hygiene becomes a survival variable. Because here's the part most people underestimate. Dirty dishes are not just unpleasant, they're dangerous over time, especially in a confined environment. Because grease traps food particles feed bacteria. And bacteria don't just sit there quietly. They multiply. They form biofilms that cling to surfaces, making them harder to remove with simple rinsing. And suddenly you're dealing with contamination cycles. Yesterday's meal affecting today's health. And in a scenario where medical help isn't easily accessible, something as minor as recurring stomach illness can drain your energy, your focus, your ability to make decisions, and that's how small problems escalate into big ones, without ever making noise. So you start layering your defenses more intelligently. And this is where timing becomes critical. Because the easiest dish to clean is the one that hasn't fully cooled and hardened, and this sounds obvious, but it's a survival principle. Fresh residue is softer, less bonded, easier to break apart, which means less effort, less water, less abrasion needed, and when resources are limited, efficiency isn't optional, it's everything. So instead of letting dishes pile up like we've all been conditioned to do, you clean immediately, while the surface is still warm, while fats are still semi-liquid. And you'll notice something almost unsettling. What used to take minutes now takes seconds, and you've just reduced your resource consumption without adding anything new. Now let's go deeper, because sometimes you won't have ash, or sand, or even the luxury of heat, and this is where plant-based saponins quietly step in, something most people have never heard of, even though they've been used for centuries. Certain plants contain natural compounds that behave like soap when agitated in water, creating a mild lather capable of breaking down oils, and while you might not recognize them at first, they exist in many regions: soap nuts, certain roots, even some leaves, and when crushed and mixed with water, they release these compounds, forming a biodegradable, renewable cleaning solution that doesn't rely on industrial production. And the beauty of this method is its scalability, because once you identify a local source, you're no longer dependent on stored supplies. You're tapping into a living system that regenerates itself. But here's the catch: natural doesn't mean effortless. And this is where most people lose interest, because these methods require participation, awareness, a bit of trial and error, and in a world addicted to convenience, that feels like friction. But in a disrupted environment, that friction becomes your advantage, because while others are waiting for restocks, you're adapting, refining, optimizing, and over time, these actions stop feeling like effort and start feeling like control. And that psychological shift might be the most valuable resource of all. And then there's something even more subtle, something almost invisible, which is the role of drying. Because a surface that's properly cleaned but left wet can still become a breeding ground. Moisture invites microbial growth, especially in warm environments, so you start thinking beyond just washing. You think about airflow, about exposure, about letting surfaces dry completely, preferably in sunlight when possible, because ultraviolet radiation adds another layer of passive sanitation, breaking down microbial DNA over time. And suddenly, your kitchen isn't just a place where food is prepared, it's an ecosystem you're actively managing.